Today was a good day on Oak Island. It's obvious that it's the end of a beam. So we're in a tunnel, and I'm very excited to exploit this find.
20 inches of sediment lie above it, followed by a layer of peat. Beneath that is stone shaped by human hands, in a place where stone should not be. With every sweep of the excavator arm along the southeastern edge of the Oak Island swamp, another 100 years is peeled away. And what keeps emerging is not mud. It is construction. Cut stakes driven into earth that should have swallowed them. Timbers placed crosswise beneath the rock. Barrel wood, hand-forged iron, and pounds of coal that could never have simply washed in. 2 centuries of searching have never uncovered anything quite like it. So where does it go? The ground that runs backwards, the swamp, has never been an easy place to work. It is wet. It swallows machinery up to the axle, and for years. It was the part of the property most people preferred to walk around instead of through. Marty Lagina never hid his personal skepticism. He believed there was nothing down there and said it repeatedly. But the crew working the southern edge of the triangle-shaped swamp are no longer describing mud. They are describing a sequence. First, loose top material peeling from the bucket teeth and ropes. Then sediment, fine and gray. Then peat, dark as wet tobacco, rising in slabs that keep the bucket's shape. Then the same compacted layer the road itself was built upon. Peat accumulates season after season. Plant matter compresses beneath standing water that prevents almost anything from rotting. When it is described as contemporaneous with the road, the implication is difficult to escape. The two belong to the same moment, and whatever was dropped or abandoned during construction remains inside that layer. So the plan shifts. Instead of digging through it, the team brings the metal detector over to scan the exposed surface first. Gary Drayton agrees and comes across, boots sinking as he walks, commenting on how squidgy the ground feels underfoot. The coil sweeps and the ground remains completely silent. He reports almost no metal, moves farther along the cut, and finds nothing there either. Then Rick Lagina, studying the excavation wall rather than the floor, suddenly stops. The lid at the bottom of the mud. It rests in the mud, revealed by the cut, a curved piece of worked wood. Rick calls everyone over and immediately identifies it as the top of a keg, not a branch, a lid buried at the bottom of the mud, exactly where the cultural level sits. The position here is the entire point of it. Anything shallower could be explained by frost heave, by centuries of freezing and thawing moving material upward. This one is at the bottom, exactly where it was left. If you want to see where the stone line finally leads, subscribe now, because the final stretch of this road is where its direction stops being a guess. Gary offers an interpretation that changes how everything around it is viewed. Kegs, he points out, did not just carry gunpowder. They carried treasure coins too. That is a major claim to place on a curved piece of wood, and it deserves the challenge it invites. Kegs carried everything along a working coast. Salt pork, nails, tar, brandy, powder. A barrel head in that setting is about as ordinary an artifact as the Atlantic world could produce. But context can turn ordinary into intriguing. And this context is specific. The lid is sealed into the bottom of a mud layer directly connected to a stone road that required enormous labor to construct in a swamp, showing no other obvious reason for human activity. There is also a precedent nobody on that crew has forgotten. In 1861, during one of the earliest organized excavations of the Money Pit, searchers recovered part of a keg barrel from deep inside the shaft. Now another keg piece appears on a stone road that seems to run toward the same location. Then a second fragment surfaces near the first, and Rick holds them side by side against the light to compare the grain sweep. One of them, he observes, looks too rounded. The radii differ. They are not from the same vessel, which does not weaken the case. One barrel in a bog is an accident. 2 different sizes at the same depth on the same construction begin to look like cargo. Rick's instinct is not to create a story from it. It is to bag it. He asks whether a chemical trace could still be clinging to the grain left behind by whatever the container once carried. talks about what the pieces might reveal about tools and cultural influence, whether the marks point to a particular blade or coopering tradition. And then he says the thing that has kept this search honest for more than a decade. This is not the time to speculate about why they are there. This is the time to apply science. The wood goes into a bag. The bucket swings back in. And the next thing the excavator reveals is not an object at all. An archaeologist walks the stone. The team has learned that raw enthusiasm alone is not evidence, so they bring in someone whose job is to remain unimpressed. Dr. Aaron Taylor is brought onto the swamp to keep the investigation as thorough and careful as conditions allow. He is not there to support anyone's theory. He is there to document what is physically present. What is physically present is hard to see without reacting. Beneath a low gray sky, the exposed stone stretches in a line through black ground. Each block is slick where the mud has been washed away, catching what little light exists and returning it in dull silver. Tom cannot stay detached. He calls it absolutely amazing to see something like this in a place like this. Says nobody would ever imagine it would be here, and admits he has never seen anything like it. Aaron's assessment is more restrained and more valuable. Asked for his opinion as it stands, he says he would describe it as a road leading toward the uplands, with a rubbly pathway extending down from it all the way to the lower ground. Possibly, he adds, whoever built it had also created a small harbor somewhere to unload materials, a harbor at the bottom, a pathway from the harbor, a road rising to the uplands. That is not a farm track. That is an unloading system with a destination. And it was costly. Aaron points out that it was a road that would have required a great deal of work to construct. In a bog, that is a massive statement. Peat has almost no bearing capacity. Put weight on it, and the weight sinks. It acts less like soil and more like a saturated sponge, and every stone placed on it should have gradually disappeared. Anyone wanting a road across this ground in the pre-industrial era needed a reason powerful enough to justify hauling tons of rock into a place that actively refuses to support it, which raises the question Aaron puts forward. What is keeping the stone elevated because it has not sunk? The road is still solid, still maintaining its line beneath centuries of accumulated mud. Something is underneath it. And the team continues finding pieces of wood in the spoil, enough of them that they are already using a specific word for what they think they are seeing: cribbing. Then Rick, running his hand along the exposed edge and feeling for where the surface ends, discovers something that is not wood. What supports a road in a bog? They expected timbers. Aaron had already raised the possibility of a supporting framework beneath the stone. What Rick has discovered is not a beam. It is another layer of stone beneath the first. He pushes down on it with the flat of his hand, and the ground gives nothing. He comments on how firm it is and asks the others to feel it themselves. All around it, the swamp is soup, black water rising into every boot print. But this one patch is solid enough to lean against. Beneath the mud, beneath the visible surface, there is a second course of stone, and beneath that, something thick that does not fit neatly into any category. Then Scott Barlow identifies the object that completely changes the interpretation. He calls it a cut stake, not a stick. Whatever it is, cut stake, not driftwood. A stake with a deliberately shaped worked point running directly beneath one of the large stones. The exposed end is dark from saturation, but the facets remain visible. Flat planes meeting at an angle no river could ever create. Aaron calls it very interesting, and confirms there is some kind of cribbing or support. The stake is sampled for testing because a cut end is among the most informative things it can provide. The shape of the cut can reveal the blade can suggest the era, and the wood itself can be dated. Rick finds another, then more cut stakes, plural, driven into the ground beneath a stone road in a bog. That is not nature's coincidence. That is engineering, and a particular kind of it used across centuries and continents. Wherever people needed to move heavy loads across ground that would not support them, stakes were driven. Brush and timber were laid across them. The load was spread over a raft of material, allowing the stone to float on the peat instead of sinking through it. Somebody knew exactly how to do that and brought that knowledge to a small island off the coast of Nova Scotia. Scott captures the mood with the honesty that defines this dig. They get excited about everything they discover, and every time they are left with more questions. Tom makes the point sharper, calling them bigger questions. Rick settles on calling the entire thing a mystery. And Aaron does not disagree. And then something comes out of that mud that could not have gotten there by itself. The rock that burns, then a piece of something rises from the bucket that brings the work to a stop. Coal, Scott confirms it, turning the piece over in his palm. Brittle and angular and blacker than the peat surrounding it, leaving a smear across his glove. That is the coal they have been finding. So that's the coal we're finding. Yeah, we found some pieces fairly large. And they have found it in quantity, not flecks, not a scattering of dark specks, pieces described as fairly large. And by this point, they have pounds of it. Tom laughs and asks the obvious question. What would coal be doing down there at all? Scott gives the answer that shuts down the innocent explanation. Coal does not float. It did not wash in. It did not drift across the swamp and settle onto a stone road by accident. Somebody left it there, and whoever used this place brought fire with them. The only time coal is known to have been used in any quantity on Oak Island, as far as the documented search history shows, is 1860 or later. Before that, there was no need for it, and nobody was operating coal-fired equipment on that island. Yet here it is beneath swamp mud on a construction that may be centuries older than the first shovel of the organized treasure hunt. There is a theory this feeds into, and it belongs to a man who spent his life on this mystery. 1 year earlier, Gary Drayton pulled a badly burned strap from the swamp. Blacksmith Carmen Legge examined it and identified it as belonging to an early 18th century ship. A ship's fitting, burned, that artifact added weight to a theory long held by the late Fred Nolan, who surveyed Oak Island for decades and was often dismissed for the claims he made. Nolan argued that Oak Island was once two islands divided by a channel where the swamp now sits. A treasure galleon sailed in between the two land masses. Its cargo was unloaded. Then the ship was burned and sunk, and the channel filled in, creating the swamp that exists today. For years, that was treated as one of the wilder ideas in the Oak Island canon. A burned ship strap, pounds of coal beneath a buried stone road. A swamp that refuses to behave like a natural feature. The question is no longer whether Nolan was imaginative. The question is what else he got right. And the man who spent years insisting there was nothing in that swamp is now heading down to see it. The chain that fits the road. Marty Lagina and Craig Tester come to the southern border to inspect the structure beneath the stone with Rick and the rest of the team, and the description they receive is precise. There were two logs beneath the edge, fitted together as though one had been shaped to rest against another, the way corners are joined when a cabin is built. Beneath the structure itself, brush and smaller logs placed as though to support the road. Swamp muck mixed with larger logs at the bottom, running perpendicular to the road and embedded deeply enough into the stonework that Jack Begley can state the sequence confidently. It was laid down during the road's construction, not afterward, as part of the build, and then it stopped abruptly. That is the edge. Rick explains what that means. There are large timbers beneath the stone road, which emphasizes that this was a massive undertaking. Somebody built that road for a specific purpose, and he adds the detail that has always troubled him about this island. He believes they wanted it to remain undiscovered after they finished. Marty listens without arguing, which by itself is unusual. Then the chains come out. Old-looking, unusual chains, and Marty has heard about them before seeing them. 2 weeks earlier, while excavating the southern edge of the potentially 500-year-old stone road, the team recovered a large hand-wrought chain and hook. Carmen Legge dated the work to the 16th century. hand-forged and configured as a 3-point hitch, possibly even a 4-point. Spread out on the ground, the links are heavy and irregular, each one thickened where the hammer closed it. The entire thing is crusted orange and flakes beneath a thumbnail. It has weight. Nobody carries that into a bog for a light job now. The chain goes onto the road, and the practical logic begins assembling itself. A man stands on the stable stone surface. He hooks a box or something else extremely heavy with a 3-point hitch. He unloads it from a vessel or loads it. Because a multi-point hitch distributes the pull, the load can be dragged across ground that would otherwise remain impassable. Brought to the edge of the bog and pulled directly up the road. Connecting the chain to the road, the team agrees, is an explanation that makes sense. It accounts for the construction's strength, the surface's stability, and the effort required to put both there. Rick calls it a major discovery and explains what the excavation has accomplished. They have clearly established the extent of the structure and the point where it changes into the beach, which opens the question hanging over the entire swamp investigation. Does it match the idea of a larger ship waiting offshore, a tender moving in, and material being brought to a constructed slipway? A wharf? A dock? The answer comes without hesitation. It fits perfectly. So, what happens next? The digging continues below where Billy is working. As Rick puts it, the best dig is still ahead. And within the hour, the bucket strikes something that brings the machine to a halt where the road ends. Gary expresses high hopes for the next bucket, as the arm reaches back in, telling the crew it is time to go and find some treasure. The swamp offers them nothing. Gary reports an empty bucket and calls the ground silent. The bucket rises dripping, the spoil pile spreading and collapsing as the water drains from it. Then, inside the wet mess, something, a piece of wood wider at one end than the other, curved along its length. Still keeping the bend, a cooper put into it, a barrel stave. Gary immediately points out that it resembles the staves already recovered from the swamp and that they now have enough pieces to make a real comparison rather than a guess. Marty follows the thread. They are trying to determine whether the idea that this is an offloading area is right or wrong. A barrel fits that. Everything important aboard a ship traveled inside a cask. The discovery reaches backward. 2-3 years earlier, pieces of wooden cargo barrels were uncovered in this same area, and Carmen Legge believed they might be as much as 600 years old. Then the excavator catches on something. Gary cannot figure out what is happening. The bucket is catching on something. Wood or stone, nobody can tell from above. Billy works the bucket, and it meets resistance. Hydraulic strain, the machine settling onto its tracks instead of the earth giving way. Steel strikes something that refuses to move, and the sound carries. A boulder. The immediate response is caution, not celebration. Marty does not know whether it means the road is ended. He and Gary walk over to inspect it, picking their way across ground that grips every step. Then another stone beside it. 2 large rocks, and Gary makes the observation that changes them from obstacles into evidence. From his position, they could be aligned with the stone road. Marty suggests they could be retaining rocks, and Gary agrees they would create the retaining edge, the curb of the construction, marking where the built surface finishes and the ground takes over. And standing there, Marty says what his brother has waited 10 years to hear. He does not think you can stand and look at that stone road without thinking it served a special purpose. It is a remarkably massive construction, and it must have been made for a reason. He goes further. He has been completely wrong about the extent of the workings in the swamp. He thought there was nothing. There is plenty. Rick has watched that transformation happen. Marty was never a fan of the swamp, but with every discovery, Rick says he can see the twinkle in his brother's eye. He thinks Marty is starting to like it. What was it for? Marty is willing to see what the evidence suggests as they continue digging. And then comes the sentence that gives this search its energy. It could lead straight to what they have been looking for all these years. The instruction to Billy is simple. Keep moving that way. Scrape along, and the stones keep appearing. The route itself. This is when the discoveries stop being a collection and become a line. because a route is not one isolated find. A route is a sequence of features that agree with one another about direction. It starts at the water, boulders in alignment, creating a retaining edge where the construction meets the lower ground. Behind them, a rough pathway. Above that, the stone road laid on cut stakes and brush and perpendicular timbers driven into peat to keep the whole thing from sinking. From there, it rises toward the uplands, and the uplands are where the money pit sits. Now that line is filled with what has emerged from the mud along its length. Barrel staves potentially 600 years old in the area where cargo would have been unloaded. A keg lid at the base of the cultural layer, and another fragment of a different radius. A hand-wrought chain and hook dated to the 16th century, rigged exactly as a heavy load would be pulled from a vessel and up a slope. A burned ship strap from an early 18th century vessel. Pounds of coal that could not have floated in and that predate any documented reason for coal on the island. This is not random distribution. Every one of those objects belongs to the same activity, and every one was found along the same axis. That is the signature of a working landing point, and the swamp is still not finished. Gary keeps explaining what the place does to him. The exciting part, as he tells it, is the possibility that Billy puts the bucket in and the next thing anyone knows. Truly great old artifacts are coming up from the ground, which is exactly what happens. 3 pieces of wood emerge together. 2 strips that look like staves, 3 interesting pieces of wood. Barrel staves, got 2 strips, and then this looks like a handle. And a third that stops everyone. Rounded edges, a strange piece of wood worn smooth along one side in a way that catches the eye before the mind can identify it. It looks like a handle, an old pickaxe handle perhaps, or an axe. The team describes it as almost hand-shaped. A shaped tool handle in the construction layer of a stone road nobody can date with certainty. If analysis can establish its age, it does not just tell the team when the road was built. It might point toward who built it. Because tool forms travel with the people who make them. More rocks emerge, larger ones moving along the same heading. Gary asks whether they are aligned with the others, and Billy confirms that they are. The pattern is beginning to look deliberate, and every stone gives the team another reason to follow it deeper into the swamp. So the team follows the line, one stone buried, another farther beyond it. A fairly steady row with a flat one sitting lower and behind. One here, one there, one there. Marty pushes further into what that actually means. And the answer given is that there may still be more buried between them. That is what a road looks like when it remains underground after several hundred years. Not a neat paved surface waiting to be photographed, but a pattern of stones, some exposed, some buried, holding a course across ground that should have swallowed them centuries ago. The line emerges from the water and rises toward the one place on Oak Island where 2¼ centuries of searching have been focused. And Gary, who has spent years extracting metal from this island soil, says the thing that hangs over the entire excavation. He is telling them directly that they have found something here, which is the moment when the case must face its toughest test. What the road still refuses to say. No one on that team acts as though the case is settled because every artifact recovered so far has a conventional explanation available. Barrel staves appear wherever people worked. Chains and hooks were used by farmers, fishermen, and salvagers just as much as by anyone moving treasure. Coal reached Nova Scotia in massive quantities during the 19th century, and a burn event proves fire, not purpose. Even the alignment toward the uplands could represent nothing more than the shortest solid route between water and dry land, which is why most roads exist in the first place. That is exactly why the sequence being tracked matters. Rick declined to speculate about the keg fragments and requested chemical analysis instead. The cut stake was bagged for testing rather than put on display. The barrel stave was separated for comparison. An archaeologist was brought in specifically to limit the interpretation. If this road proves to be ordinary, the tests will show it, and the evidence that would settle it is still absent. There is no dated, uncontested connection between the swamp construction and the shaft in the uplands. Alignment is suggestive. Alignment is not proof. Nobody knows for certain whether the boulder marks the road's end or where it bends, and the log they believed was the terminus proved to be an edge rather than a finish. Billy wants the rest of the team to inspect it. Marty thinks it could matter and wants to discuss it with Rick and Craig Tester before deciding what comes next. What cannot be explained away is intent. Someone spread the weight with stakes and timber so the stone would not sink. Someone pulled heavy loads along it using hand-forged chain. And in Rick's interpretation, someone then worked to make sure it would never be found again. Nobody conceals a farm track. Subscribe so you do not miss where those stones lead once the team follows the route inland. And tell me in the comments what you think that road was built to carry, because the chain says it was heavy and the barrels say it was cargo. Then watch the video on your screen now for everything the swamp revealed before this excavation began.